Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the Digital Marketing Therapy Podcast. Sammy here, your host, and I am here with another small business owner today to talk about how she's creating content, what she's creating, and helping her with some ideas for how to promote it. So Katy Ipock is my guest, and she is a comedian, producer, and on the forefront of the comedy scene in Central Oregon. And she recently started a podcast of her own called the Comedy Mom Podcast, which helps comedians that are in their first year grow and get booked. So it's a really cool podcast, very niche, very awesome. And I wanted her to come on to talk about what it was like for her when it came to creating her podcast. How did she get started? What did she do? And then how can we help her get more listeners to her podcast? So that's what we're going to talk about today. I hope you'll stick around and listen. But before we get to it, this episode is brought to you by our 30-day website roadmap. This roadmap gives you 30 things that you need to be considering before you redesign or create a website. Save you time and money by coming together to the table with all of the elements that you need, locked and loaded, ready to go. So whether you choose to hire somebody to do it or do it yourself, you've got everything you need and you can just execute and get it done. So head on over to thefirstclick.net/30 days. I'm going to say that again, thefirstclick.net/30 days to download this free roadmap. And I can't wait to see your websites that you create. Let's get to it. You're listening to the Digital Marketing Therapy Podcast. I'm your host, Sammy Bedell-Mulhern, and each week I bring you tips from myself and other experts, as well as hot seats with small business owners and entrepreneurs to demystify digital marketing and get you on your way to generating more leads and growing your business. I would love to give a warm welcome to Katy Ipock. Katy, welcome to the podcast.
I'm so excited to be here, Sammy. You have no idea.
Yay! Well, Katy is a comedian here in Central Oregon, and a new podcaster, a newbie to the podcasting world. So congratulations and welcome to the community.
Yes, thank you. I'm really excited. I went to broadcasting school, so I have this 10,000 hours of vocal training and experience in editing audio and all of this stuff that I'm not really using in comedy. So I'm excited to finally put those skills to work.
That's awesome. So why don't you share with people a little bit about kind of why you decided to get into comedy and how that's kind of turned into the podcast and what your podcast is about?
So I started doing comedy January 6th, 2015. I'm about to hit my 5-year anniversary.
Congratulations.
Thank you. I went to that first open mic, honestly, because I have always really enjoyed attention. And I know that's usually seen as a negative thing, but it's the truth. And I was a stay-at-home mom, and, I was barely leaving my house once every 3 months, let alone getting on a stage or performing or putting a microphone in my mouth or basically getting positive attention from strangers. And I was starting to kind of itch for it. And my mother had told me for the longest time that public speaking is a skill, and if I don't use it, I'm going to lose it, blah, blah, blah. And I kind of ignored it because I'm never going to be a politician. I'm never going to be able to do public speaking in that form. I'm always going to be a little too gritty. And I don't want to say honest, but inappropriate. Like me in politics, it's just not going to work. And I do not have an inspiring enough a life story to try to get into like motivational speaking. So I kind of figured my public speaking days were done. And then I saw an ad for an open mic, and I'd never even considered stand-up comedy before. I'd watched some of it, but I wasn't even a huge fan. I'd never gone to a show live. But I realized I was like, oh, this is a chance for me to get in front of a microphone in front of people and get some attention from strangers. I am all in. And I had done some speech team in high school, and I'd gone to broadcasting school. And so I spent a good 3 weeks writing that first set, because, I'm used to speech team where you write it and choreograph it. And my background is in like persuasive speeches. So I'm used to like transitional walks and using my hands and being really serious about it. So I took that mentality into it. I ended up like 30 plus people ended up coming to watch me see my first one, which probably should have been a sign. Yeah, that was a sign that that I'm funnier than I thought I was at the time. Did great. Of course, I watched that set back now because I record almost every set I do. And I see things that I did that make me cringe now. But I got 2 paid gigs off my first open mic and just said yes to stage time for a year until I finally decided I wanted to take it seriously.
That's incredible. Well, and the guts it takes to just say like, hey, I'm just going to like go up there and tell jokes. And I've never done this before. Like, I think that's very bold.
I call it having a performer's heart, which is a really nice way of saying that I have an ego.
Yeah.
But I mean, but anyone who really thinks that they should stand on a stage, more importantly, someone who thinks that you should say, pay money to sit there and watch me stand on a stage and talk about myself, obviously has an ego. And I think the difference between an ego, which some people see as a really negative thing, and a performer's heart, which I've chosen to believe is a very good thing, I don't know. It's what makes you feel better when you're trying to fall asleep at night, I guess.
Well, I think we all have gifts that we bring to the world. And we all have a purpose, and we all have things that, and having comedy and laughter in our life is a very important thing. So, you do you, and I could never do that, but that doesn't mean that I don't enjoy comedy. And if there weren't people like you out there doing it that can, then we would all have a little less laughter in our lives.
I love to say that stage fright is my job security, because if no one had stage fright, there are people in this world that are way funnier than I am, who have their sense of humor is just elevated and amazing, but they have that horrible stage fright. I wouldn't get gigs if everybody in the world could do this. That's not to say that I'm not great. I feel like I'm pretty good, but like stage fright is my job security.
I love that.
When people forget, stage fright in the end goes back to our evolution. It goes to the beginning of us as thinking human beings. We had to stay okay with the community around us, right? Because if our community ostracized us and didn't let us sleep around the fire that night, we would get eaten by whatever monster was out in the world. So that's where, and stage fright is really just a fear of being ostracized. It's a fear of somebody not liking what you're going to do. So most people who have stage fright, it's because they are biologically wired to stay cool with their community so they don't get eaten by the monster. Those of us who don't have stage fright, if we were back those 2,000-3,000 years or whatever, we would get eaten by the monster.
Yeah.
So we're kind of the broken ones, but because society is what it is now, we're actually able to use that to help our communities.
That's awesome.
That's all stage fright is.
I know too that, one of the things that you've been working on in your evolution in comedy is kind of how do you get more content out to people? How do you help support people that are now trying to be stand-up comedians and grow in their career? And that was kind of the inspiration behind your podcast, right?
Absolutely. So I've been performing for 5 years. I've started producing shows. I'm at about 2.5 year mark. And I've noticed as I've started my open mics that the growth trajectory in Bend for a brand new stand-up comic is way different than it is within the rest of the world. In theory, it should take you 5, maybe 10 years before you get your first paid show. But for some reason in Central Oregon, it only takes, right now, on average, it takes 4 to 5 months for me to take someone from a brand new open mic to being able to put them in a show. And I've been trying to figure out what that process is so I can replicate it. And I honestly think, and I mean, again, I'm going to talk about myself a little, but I think it's because when I'm training comics, I'm not doing it from a place that they're my competition. Like my goal is to encourage them. I tell people all the time, I want to be the worst person in my shows. I want my comedy children to be better than I am. I want them to do road work and I want them to grow. And I'm starting to realize that mentality really isn't common. And so my hope with this new podcast, the Comedy Mom Podcast, is to be able to kind of help the people in other cities that might not have that same support as people do here in Bend.
Yeah. Well, it's the support. It's also, I really appreciate kind of that abundance mentality. They're not my competition. I think if we all looked at things that way, and lifted each other up, I think we'd all be in a better place. But that's my little soapbox. So I agree with you there. 100%. So you and I know each other personally, and you've been doing a lot of, taking a lot of my programs and my courses, which I love. But, this is something we've been talking about for a while. And then all of a sudden you pop up and you've got like, I don't know, how many podcast episodes are you on now? Like 15?
I think so.
And you did this all in like I guess for me, what I'm asking in a roundabout way is, for a lot of listeners, creating content is like a tedious thing. And it's like, oh, okay, I have to do a blog, or I have to do a podcast, or I have to do YouTube. And they're scared to get out and do it. And it feels like you just kind of ripped the Band-Aid off and said, okay, like you said earlier, I can do a podcast. I have those skills to do it. So I'm just going to do it. So what was kind of the thing that just pushed you to just do it?
So part of what pushed me to do it is I've been thinking about creating a course in stand-up comedy, like an actual course to take people from, I think I want to try an open mic, to doing their first open mic. And part of what's been holding me back from that is this imposter syndrome feeling that like, I'm not good enough to teach somebody that, even though that's what I do in my business now. But the idea of actually monetizing that. And so as I was thinking about the course and thinking about how I would train people, I suddenly realized that it almost works better as a podcast. And it will help reach more people. Like, yes, in theory, I could do a course here in town and get 8 to 10 people. And or I could translate all these thoughts in my head into a podcast and hope that it reaches people in small communities all over, and give them that same advice and hopefully the same support. And so I decided, and if anything, to try it as a podcast first, to try out these thought processes, think about these topics, kind of write them out. And I mean, I could still do the course, but at least now I'm getting more practice in the teaching side of the art form.
So then how did you come up with your initial topics? Did you just take the ideas that you had for your course and just start to talk through them?
I literally sat down and I used Google Keep. I'm sure everyone has, different kind of note apps.
Yeah.
I literally started a Google Keep list of topics. And I started thinking about, because this podcast is all focused on somebody like in their first year of comedy. And I've been training people for 2.5 years. So I started thinking about, what are the questions that I seem to answer often? Or what are the things that I basically have to train everybody on at some point? What are the conversations I have to have? And some of the stuff is real easy. Like the first episode was all about what your first open mic is going to be like. And it was literally just taking people, this is what it looks like. This is who you're going to talk to. This is what a sign-up sheet is. This is how you hold a microphone. Like all those questions that somebody who's thinking of doing an open mic is thinking about, but no one's really putting that information out there.
Mm-hmm.
And so I came up with it was like 26 different topics.
Awesome.
Yeah. And now I'm just, as I'm feeling it, just recording them. And my goal is to keep them under 30 minutes, keep them short, keep them sweet. But yeah, the brainstorming part was literally just sitting down and kind of going back to how I was my first year, and what advice would I have liked? What are the things that if somebody would have told baby comic would have helped her,
Yeah. And so do you have that fear of running out of topics or ideas, or do you think, is that just something you've just pushed out of your head?
I don't know if I fear running out of topics, just because comedy is an ever-changing art form and there'll always be something to talk about. And I'm also not overly afraid of rehashing old topics. Like I'm willing to bet once a year, probably around New Year's resolution season, I will probably do an episode about your first open mic, because that's a lot of people try stand-up comedy around New Year's because it's their New Year's resolution. So they're really thinking about it. So even though every year it might be the annual doing your first open mic episode, but I'm not afraid of doing that over and over.
Well, and I would think your perspective on that will change every year a little bit as well as you become more seasoned.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Plus, I I don't have to just depend on my topics because I have local comedians that I can interview, and I've interviewed a couple, and we can talk about what their first time was like. And I'm hoping eventually people will email me and asking for advice or needing advice about something. So eventually I see, the topics kind of coming pretty naturally to me instead of me chasing them all the time.
Yeah. So let's talk equipment really fast. And I know that you kind of have the benefit of you do host a radio show from inside of your house. So you have some equipment already there. But what are you currently using to record?
So the first thing I will say is I am doing my podcast through Anchor, which is a specific kind of free platform. And so I record the podcast directly into Anchor, and I do very little editing. That's probably not for everybody, but it works for me. I do have experience with Adobe Audition and Audacity. I have experience with that, but I just record straight in Anchor. And, sometimes I'll trim the ends off it, but for the most part, I don't do any sort of editing. As for the microphone, I honestly cannot remember what this microphone is, but it only cost me $35 on Amazon. So I'm not using like an expensive Yeti or, anything outrageous.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, and I'm recording right into a headset right now, and we're recording into Zoom, like just earbuds. Yeah. I do have a Blue Yeti. But I find that it's almost harder to record with a nicer microphone because it picks up so much more sound around you.
Right.
That you have to pay more attention. So like right now they're doing major construction outside my house, like real loud, and the mic picks it all up. So it's actually easier for me right now to record directly into earbuds just because otherwise our editing process is so much harder.
Absolutely.
So just something to think about. Okay. So you've got this podcast, you're like 15 episodes in. If you had any advice for people starting a podcast as far as like what you've learned or what was easier than you expected or not, like what would you say to the people thinking about starting one out there?
Well, I guess the first piece of advice I would give is, advice that was given to me in my initial radio training and something I think about every time I'm in front of a microphone, especially, when it's not live in front of people. Always keep your best friend in your mind. So that way your voice always sounds like you're chatting with your friends. I know, especially if you're doing a really professional podcast, it could get really easy to get really monotone about it. And, the more monotone you get, the less likely someone's going to want to keep listening to you. But if you think about your best friend and you think about talking to your best friend, your vocal quality is automatically going to get richer. It's crazy, but it's true. So that's the first advice. Like,
can I ask you a question about that?
Yeah.
I often want to record myself, like video record myself when I do my solo episodes and even when I'm doing interviews like this, like my arms are flailing, like I'm moving around, like do you look like that too? Or do you like a fool while sitting here in your room, like talking to your computer and your hands and you're all animated and that's what helps me. But
oh, definitely. Like there's definitely movements to everything. And the facial expressions are still there. And that's actually part of the vocal training I was put through in broadcasting school, is to still use your entire body because it's going to affect the energy that's put through your voice. So still do those things because it helps you sound better. It helps that what they call the theater of the mind.
Yep.
If you're, putting in that kind of energy.
I love it.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I think the other thing I would think about is don't be afraid of being too, I guess, niche about it. Like my podcast is specific to people starting stand-up comedy in their first year. That can feel like a really small group of people, but it's still plenty. Like, don't feel like you have to appeal to every single person in the world. I think that stops people from all sorts of performance and art forms more than anything else, is they feel like they have to appeal to everybody.
Yeah, the notoriety too depends on what your goals are. Like you're starting a podcast to test out what it is that you might put into a course in the future. So you'll learn a lot about your audience. And we'll talk about promotion here in a second, but you'll learn a lot about your audience just by the topics that they're more aligned with, which ones are more popular, which one you get comments about. And then, like you said, as you get questions, specific questions from people, you'll learn a lot about where the holes are in the market for what people need to learn about. It can be easy to say, well, I want to be on New and Noteworthy on iTunes, but why? I mean, I'm not saying that it would that would be amazing, but what is the desire behind that? Does it get you to a goal or does it just make you feel good?
Right.
So I love what you say. Yeah. Focus on your niche and hit it hard.
I was just thinking about something very similar to that, about how, because I was thinking about goals for comedians, because it'll probably be the next episode I do, and how so much of comedy, like there are gatekeepers, there are bookers, and there are producers, and they choose whether we get on their stage or not. So it's so hard to set a goal when somebody else is in charge of basically your trajectory. And so you should think about your art form instead and setting goals based on what you do have control over and let go of anything you don't. Mm-hmm. So don't worry about the notoriety. Don't worry about where you are. Focus specifically on creating good content and let the gatekeepers make those decisions and just don't worry about it.
Well, that's a great lesson just in all industries, whether you're a comedian or not, because you can't control who chooses to buy from you and who doesn't. But if you create stellar content, like you're saying, and really be authentic with the audience you want to get in front of, it all comes together.
Absolutely.
Okay. So what are you currently doing? So you launched your podcast when?
I don't even remember the date, to be honest. It
hasn't been that long.
No, it's something I started. I think I recorded the first podcast. I'll pull it up. I think I recorded the first podcast at like 2:00 in the morning.
Oh, jeez.
Like I said, this isn't something like I can't say that I'm taking it very seriously. So yeah, November 17th.
Okay.
So definitely like less than a month ago.
Less than a month. And so I know one of the things we talked about before we came on is that you are just kind of recording when you record and publishing when they're done.
Yes.
Okay.
Which is probably not as strategic as it should be.
And your goal is to push this podcast outside of this local market and get in front of comedians in kind of small markets everywhere.
Yes. So I'm not interested in comedians in LA, New York, Chicago.
Right.
Not even really Seattle. Those are kind of level up markets for comics. That's where, you do open mics other places and then you move there to take your next step. I'm focused on communities like Bend, maybe Northern California, smaller cities in the Midwest where people are literally doing their first open mics and discovering stand-up.
So have you thought about ways to get yourself in front of those audiences? Or what are you doing now to promote? Just putting it on your social media?
Yes. So I created a separate Instagram for it.
Yes.
And I'm using comedy hashtags.
Okay.
Because I know comics troll those hashtags like crazy. And they do that because they're looking for bookers to get in front of. So I'm basically, trying to get my content in front of them. I've also kind of leveraged the connections I currently have in the comedy community. Not that many of them are new comics, but still like invited them to the Instagram and shared the podcast with them and that kind of thing. And then I'm also in a lot of Facebook groups that are about stand-up comedy. So anytime someone posts about wanting to do their first open mic, I slide in a link.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. Have you started researching other podcasts around comedy that you could be a guest on?
No.
So I think that would be a good next step because you're so good at it, at speaking, because you do radio, all that stuff. Like if you could get yourself on other people's podcasts, either as a comedian, like, or as people that are looking for resources, it's a great way to get in front of new audiences.
I guess I'd never thought about that. And I mean, I'll be super honest, just in case somebody else listening might feel the same way. But I'll be honest, Sammy, I don't know if I'm good enough to be on somebody else's podcast.
Yeah. Yes.
But not
you're
like,
on mine.
Well, that's because we're friends and you like me. But like, why would a stranger want me on their podcast?
Because you can provide value to their audience that they're not doing. So like, that's a big goal for me in 2020 is I want to be on at least 15 people's podcasts next year, which could be a low number, but I mean, it's a whole thing of, just like you said, imposter syndrome. You have to, if you feel like you're providing something to people and you can provide value, if you address those people as, hey, this is my passion. I love to help support comics and help them grow. If they have a network that is supporting that as well, you're just providing good quality content. And what comes from that is what comes from that. But if you approach it like you're approaching everything else, you're providing value to those people and you're actually doing them a disservice by not showing up on other people's podcasts and then getting to know you.
Well, maybe I will add that to my list of 2020
add it to your
goals
list
as well. My ever-growing list of goals.
Right. Well, don't have too many.
I completely off.
That's a whole nother topic. But it's just a great way for you to get in front of other audiences in an authentic way, because then they just get to know you. It's not a hard sell.
Right.
So think about that.
And at least within the comedy community, I know I have a vantage point that is useful because I am both a performer and a booker.
Right.
And especially if I can find regional level comedians doing podcasts, they might just have me on their podcast because they think it'll get them booked for a show.
There you go. No, it's smart. It's leveraging relationships and building collaborations, to me, are very foundational elements of marketing that just don't change, and how you can support other people. I mean, it's the same, like the more you interview people on your podcast outside of your local comedians, like even if maybe your goal is to get a number of people on your podcast, because then they'll share it with their audience as well. So there's two ways to kind of think about how you want to go about that.
Makes total sense.
Yeah.
Sure.
So maybe there are people in LA. Well, you don't want LA, but like maybe there are people in the Midwest who want to come on and share their perspective because it's a different location, right? Maybe it's different size communities. So maybe you have, towns that are 500,000 versus towns that are 10,000, and how do they navigate their local market? What are your favorite? If you're traveling all over, comedians travel all the time, right? Like, what are your must-haves to go with you on a trip?
Ooh, that's a good one.
Yeah, I don't know. Or like, what are your grossest stories about hotels you've had to stay at? I don't know. Right?
Yeah, for sure.
And so all those kinds of interviews can also help you get in front of new audiences.
Well, and luckily for me, because I don't book a lot of road comics, but I do book a few, and, some of them even have credits from being on, late shows or Netflix or whatever. There's definitely an opportunity for me to sit down and record before a show or even after, just like a 20-minute interview, and be able to leverage their social capital.
Yes.
Plus, comedians love talking about themselves on a microphone, so it's not a hard sell.
Right. Well, it's just promo for everybody, right? It gets them in front of your audience in a new way. And the thing that I love about podcasts too is that they stick around for a long time. And so if you're creating content, let's say, like you said earlier, you're not scared to repurpose or to revisit topics. So let's say a year from now, you could do let's say you did 5 or 10 or 20 episodes in the next year about a specific topic, like how to book or interviews with comics or whatever, backstage. You could then create a best of episode and have clips from like all of those that are just highlights of, okay, backstage with comics. And so there's all these ways that you can repurpose that, re-leverage it, and then get in front of their audiences again, in the next year. Because you're in this for the long term, right? This isn't a short-term thing for you.
No, it's actually quickly becoming almost an integral part of my training process with comics, because it's valuable information to them. Now, when I have a comedian say, hey, why haven't I been booked yet? I can literally send them a link to the podcast where I talk about what I'm looking for when I'm booking somebody.
So good.
I've already had 2 people be like, hey, I'm thinking of trying stand up. Do you have any advice? And I'm like, yes, I have a lot of advice, and it's in the podcast. Have a listen.
Yeah.
Like,
that's awesome.
It's becoming, kind of a cornerstone of not only how I recruit new comics, which is, important to my business, but also how I help train them and move them forward.
Okay, so you're going to hate me for this because I tell you this all the time.
That my website sucks?
No. Well, I mean, it works. But you don't have to have a perfect website. My next thing for you is to make sure that you have a method then, as you're generating all these leads from this podcast, to get their email addresses and continue to get people. Because if your ultimate goal is to build a course that you're going to sell, right? We want ultimately to monetize what we're doing. We're in the business of making money and supporting people, but at the same time. So, whether it's on your episodes, you say something like to head on over to your website to grab a freebie, or if you can embed those links in Anchor, I'm not sure. But I think your next step is really to start to collect email addresses from the people that are listening, so that you can continue to nurture them, share your podcast episodes with them when they go live, especially since you don't have a regular publishing schedule.
Right.
And then also be able to sell whatever product or service you create to this audience once you have it created.
That's true. Well, and people love freebies.
They do love freebies.
I'll admit I fall for it all the time. And I even know now, I'm like, I know I'm getting added to your mailing list, but well, I really want this list of 20 things to blah, blah, blah.
Right. It could be like your tips, because I know you have a podcast episode that's about, what to wear for your shows, right? So you could have a checklist. You could have a guy's checklist and a gal's checklist, and like things to consider. I mean, all that stuff. So that's going to be my next challenge for you, is creating a way to get people's emails so that you can sell to them in the future. Okay.
I can probably do that. I'm less anti-emails than I used to be.
I think it's because you were struggling with the purpose behind why you were sending out emails.
Yeah.
And now you have a reason.
Yeah, for sure. And it doesn't actually seem to be that annoying. I really thought it was going to annoy the people on the other end of the emails, but I have a consistent amount of people that open those emails every time, and I only get like 1 or 2 unsubscribes, maybe.
That's awesome.
And then, some people don't open them, but they don't have to.
Right. Well, it goes back to the kind of core element of all of this is, if you're creating consistent content and you're creating content that people care about, and you're creating it for the audience you want, you're providing value, and that's not annoying.
Right.
Yeah. People want value, and they're going to open emails if you give them something that gives them good information.
Exactly.
Okay. So my last kind of final question for you is, kind of where do you see this going for you? Like, are you hoping to continue to do just episodes as they go? Are you hoping to kind of lock in a schedule in 2020? Are you like doing them once a week? Like, kind of what does that look like for you as you put your content calendar together? Okay, guys, in the lovely world of technology, halfway through Katy's answer, my internet decided to go down. So I'm now recording on my phone. And I say this only because I'm sure the audio quality is going to change, because now I'm recording on my phone. And I just want to keep it real, that things happen, we keep going, and we carry on. So Katy,
Yes.
We were talking about your content calendar, and I'm not quite sure where you left off, but due to editing magic, we'll make it all sound seamless.
Well, or I can just start over because I'm pretty sure I got rambly. So
Okay.
My goal in 2020 is definitely to do weekly shows. So have a topic once a week that I'm giving advice about. And then at least twice a month, I want to do an interview with another comedian or producer or, somebody else do an interview. And that almost would be a bonus. So there would be 4 episodes a month on a topic and then 2 kind of bonus episodes that are an interview.
I love it. And I love that strategy because I have a spreadsheet that we use to track everything. And so I have all of my episodes pulled down all the way through May for the most part. Nice. Well, because it helps, right? So now as you start to put together your content, or if you start to reach out to people, you're like, okay, I think that this topic would fit in very nicely. So then you can proactively reach out to people as opposed to just kind of take what comes your way.
Right. And there are some topics that I know I should talk about on my podcast that I don't even feel super comfortable giving advice about. Mm-hmm. And so those are a great one for me to kind of seek out guests as well. Find somebody that's comfortable and proficient in that topic to give good advice.
For sure. Well, we all have, I mean, we do the same thing on this podcast. We do interviews like this with small business owners and business owners who are looking for a little bit of support, but also kind of want to help. I mean, I love this episode just because you just did the dang thing. And so hopefully it will inspire other people to do the same thing. But then I also do bring people on that are better at things than me, because I think it just helps round out that whole experience. And I think it makes you a little bit more authentic to say, okay, well, I'm really good at this. I know you need to do that, but I'm going to bring in somebody to help you do that better than I can.
Exactly. And I think that's as a leader, as a mentor, I've begun to realize that sometimes the best thing I can do for somebody is to point them in the right direction, even if, that direction isn't towards me. It's doing somebody a disservice to try to keep them so focused on you and not let them seek the professionals, I guess.
Oh, 100%. I mean, I hope that everybody heard what you just said. It's not a sign of weakness. You're really helping your audience. Yeah, 100%. So if people want to check out the Comedy Mom podcast, I know you mentioned it, it's on Anchor, but why don't you share with people a little bit about where they can find your podcast and your Instagram and all that good stuff?
So the Instagram is Comedy Mom Podcast. Just look at it. And then, so Anchor submits the podcast to other platforms for you. So I am currently on Spotify, Radio Public, Pocket Casts, Overcast, Google Podcasts, and Breaker. Most of these I don't even know, but we're on those 7. Just look up Comedy Mom or Comedy Mom Podcast. You can also find on the links on my website, ipockpro.com.
Yeah. Well, and we'll link up all of these in the show notes as well for you guys to check her out and hopefully share it with any of those budding comedians that are into your life. But I just thank you so much for coming on and chatting with everybody. This is a challenge to all of you to pick the thing in 2020, content-wise, that you like to do, get out and just do it.
Just do it. I think, what holds people back more than anything is this idea that you have to be an overnight success. The first thing you put out, whether it's the first episode or the first blog post or the first whatever, if it doesn't go viral, you're a failure. And that is absolutely not true. It is an unrealistic expectation. And it's crap. So, don't worry about that. Worry, not even worry, but just think about your art or whatever you're producing. Focus on that. If you put pressure on yourself for it to be a success by like society standards, you're never going to even get started. So don't even think about that. Don't worry about that.
Well, overnight successes are typically never actually overnight successes, right? They've been working for decades.
One of my comedy mentors and I joke about that all the time because he's right on the cusp Like he's right there. Like he's going to get booked any minute for like a late night show. And we know once that happens, he's going to be an overnight success, even though he's been doing comedy for 15, 20 years. But the moment society, the rest of the world sees his face and falls in love with him, like the Pacific Northwest has, you know, he will get labeled an overnight success.
Yep.
Which is not true, but he keeps waiting. We keep waiting.
I can't wait to be an overnight success 10 to 15 years from now.
Right?
It's going to be awesome. Well, thank you so much, Katy. I really appreciate you coming on and sharing your experience. And I hope some folks go check out your podcast. And if you're in Central Oregon, check out her shows.
Yes, the shows are amazing.
They are good.
A big thank you again to Katy for joining me on this podcast. I just love how open and honest she is and how she just shares it all for you guys. And I hope that you were inspired by some of the things that she shared with you, and really just get out there and get going. Create that content in 2020. I know you can do it. So I hope that you'll head on over to the show notes at thefirstclick.net/podcast to get all the information that you need from this episode and other episodes. And make sure that you subscribe wherever you listen so you don't miss out on an episode. Remember, we're coming to you live now twice a week on Tuesdays and Fridays, and I would hate for you to miss out on an episode. I guess not live. We're not coming to you live. We're coming to you recorded. And thank goodness, because you heard the tech issues that we had in this episode with the pesky internet. So I hope you're enjoying these episodes, and let me know if there's a topic we haven't covered that you'd like us to cover. We'll see you in the next one.